This video begins to look at the historical trends related to federalism. So, most of American history is sort of like a conflict, a battle between the national government and the states to see who's going to exercise more power. It's more like a competition. It's not like a nice sharing of power, it's sort of like competition between the states and national government. And what you see is, depending on what's going on in the country at the time period, it might be a time period, an era, a period in which the national government's more dominant, or maybe the states are more dominant. And you see this like back and forth throughout American history, right? So the first era that we're going to look at is from like the beginning of our country's history to like 1830. And this is a time period in American history that definitely tends to favor a much stronger national government, right? The national government kind of comes out of the gates at the beginning of our country's history and immediately asserts its power and dominance over the states. And what you tend to see during this time period, right, are Supreme Court rulings that definitely make the national government more powerful. So, for example, at the beginning of our country's history, John Marshall is the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. He's one of the most famous, influential Chief Justices in our Supreme Court's history. John Marshall was someone that was an aide to George Washington and Valley Forge, and very much saw the dangers of when a national government was weak and couldn't provide for its army and its own citizens. So, in his formative moments, he began to appreciate and understand the importance of a strong national government. So when he becomes Chief Justice, a lot of his court's decisions tend to either give power to the national government or take power away from the states. So, for example, one of the most influential Supreme Court rulings in our country's history occurred in 1803 in a Supreme Court case called Marbury versus Madison. Up until this 1803 decision, the Supreme Court didn't actually even have the ability to declare laws unconstitutional. That's something we call judicial review. Marshall and his court, right, basically gave themselves this power as part of the outcome of this Supreme Court case. This makes the national government super powerful because it basically gives one of the national government branches the ability to strike down laws as being unconstitutional. It makes a viable third branch. So it increases the power of the national judicial branch. We've also already talked a little bit about McCulloch versus Maryland in class. This was the 1819 case that gave the Supreme Court the ability to, or the Supreme Court gave Congress the ability to pass laws that like weren't necessarily listed in the Constitution. They weren't powers that were listed in the Constitution. And again, you should have your own cheat sheet that goes over the details of McCulloch versus Maryland in more detail. And then even Gibbons versus Ogden. This was an 1824 Supreme Court case that just reestablished that it was the right of the national government to regulate interstate commerce. This is like any kind of economic activity that involves more than one state. So, like for example, Pennsylvania can increase or decrease its minimum wage because it involves intra-state commerce, INTRA, just involves Pennsylvania. But any sort of law that might like deal with multiple states is something that the national government does, not the states, right? So like the state of New York or the state of New Jersey can't like do something economically that decides something for another state. The national government decides like stuff that goes on between multiple states that impacts multiple states. That's not the domain of the state government. So again, the founding of our country's history to about 1830 is this example of like national government dominance and the national government definitely exercising maybe greater power than the states would like them to.